The Battle of the Plains of Abraham, also known as the Battle of Quebec, was a pivotal battle in the 7 Years' War. The battle, which began on 13 September 1759, was fought by the British Army and Navy, against the French Army, on a plateau just outside the walls of Quebec City, on land that was originally owned by a farmer named Abraham Martin, hence the name of the battle. The battle involved fewer than 10,000 troops between both sides, but proved to be a deciding moment in the conflict between France and Britain over the fate of New France, influencing the later creation of Canada. The culmination of a 3-month siege by the British, the battle lasted about 15 minutes. British troops commanded by General James Wolfe successfully resisted the column advance of French troops and Canadians militia under General Louis Joseph Marquis de Montcalm, using new tactics that proved extremely effective against standard military formations used in most large European conflicts. Both generals were mortally wounded during the battle. Wolfe received 3 gunshot wounds that ended his life within minutes of the beginning of the engagement, and Montcalm died the next morning after receiving a musket ball wound just below his ribs. In the wake of the battle, the French evacuated the city. Their remaining military force in Canada and the rest of North America came under increasing pressure from British forces, while the French forces continued to fight and prevailed in several battles after Quebec was captured. The British did not relinquish their hold on the virtually impregnable citadel. That tenacity carried over to other areas in North America. Within 4 years, with the Treaty of Paris, France ceded most of its possessions in eastern North America to Great Britain. Overview. As the 7 Years' War entered its later stages through 1758 and 1759, French forces and colonies in northeastern North America came under renewed attacks from British armies. In 1758, after defeat in July at the Battle of Carillon, the British took Louisbourg in August, causing Atlantic Canada to fall into British hands, and opening the sea route to attack Quebec. Fort Frontenac fell to the British in the same month, costing the French supplies for the Ohio Valley Campaign. When some of the Indian supporters of the French made peace with the British, France was forced to draw its troops back. French leadership, specifically Governor de Vaudreuil and General Montcalm, were unsettled by the British successes. However, Quebec was still able to protect itself as the British prepared a 3-pronged attack for 1759. James Wolfe expected to lead 12,000 men, but was greeted by only approximately 400 officers, 7,000 regular troops, and 300 gunners. Wolfe's troops were supported by a fleet of 49 ships and 140 smaller craft led by Admiral Charles Saunders. In preparation for the fleet's approach to Quebec, James Cook surveyed a large portion of the river, including a dangerous channel known as the Traverse. Cook's ship was one of the first ships up the river, sounding the channel and guiding the fleet as it moved up, eventually landing Wolfe and his men on the Isle d'Orléans on 28 June. The French attempted to attack the fleet by sending 7 fireships downriver to disrupt the landing, but the ships fired too early and British sailors in longboats were able to pull the flaming craft clear of the fleet. The following day, Wolfe's troops landed on the south bank of the river at Point Levis, nearly directly across the river from Quebec. An artillery battery was established there in early July that nearly leveled the lower town by bombardment. Despite an air of defeatism among the leadership, the professional French troops and new French militia defenders focused preparations for the British attacks on the Beauport shore. Montcalm and his staff, Major General François de Gaston, Chevalier de Reilly-Écoute-Vies, Colonel Louis-Antoine de Bougainville, and Lieutenant Colonel de Senezergue, distributed some 12,000 troops in a 9-kilometer-long collection of fortified redoubts and batteries from the St. Charles River to the Montmorency Falls, along the shallows of the river in areas that had previously been targeted by British attempts to land. Prior to the arrival of the British, a small fleet of supply ships had arrived in Quebec with much-needed supplies. Those supplies, along with 500 reinforcements, were likely behind the lengthened siege. Wolfe, on surveying the town of Beauport, found that the houses there had been barricaded and organized to allow for musket fire from within. They were built in an unbroken line along the road, providing a formidable barrier. In addition, a screen of trees along the Montmorency River made an approach on that route dangerous. On the 31st of July, the first serious attempt by Wolfe's troops to land on the northern shore led to the Battle of Beauport, also known as the Battle of Montmorency. Approximately 3,500 troops, supported by a heavy bombardment, attempted to land, but were caught under fire in the river shallows. Members of the Louisbourg Grenadiers, who reached the beach, attempted a generally undisciplined charge on the French positions, but came under heavy fire. A thunderstorm ended the fight and allowed Wolfe to pull his troops back after taking some 450 casualties to Montcalm's 60. Some French officers felt the Montmorency defeat would be the last British attack. Vaudreuil wrote afterwards that, "I have no more anxiety about Quebec. Wolfe, I assure you, will make no progress." He contented himself with losing about 500 of his best soldiers. He predicted another attack would come within days. Others in the French camp felt the campaign was over. For the remainder of the summer, Wolfe's focus changed, possibly due to frustration with Montcalm's tactics. His troops, along with American Rangers, attacked and destroyed small French settlements along the St. Lawrence. An estimated 1,400 stone houses and manors were destroyed, and many colonists killed. The effort was likely an attempt to force Montcalm's army out of its fortifications, but was unsuccessful. However, the attacks did reduce the amount of supplies available to the French, especially as the British Navy, unable to control the St. Lawrence entirely, was successfully blockading the ports in France. Preparations. Through the summer siege, illness spread through the British camps. In August, Wolfe himself was bedridden, causing already low morale to slump even further among the British troops. With many men in camp hospitals, British fighting numbers were thinned, and Wolfe personally felt that a new attack was needed by the end of September, or Britain's opportunity would be lost. In addition, his frustration with Montcalm's defensive stance continued to grow. In a letter to his mother, Wolfe wrote, "The Marquis of Montcalm is at the head of a great number of bad soldiers, and I am at the head of a small number of good ones that wish for nothing so much as to fight him, but the wary old fellow avoids an action." Doubtful of the behavior of his army, Montcalm also expressed frustration over the long siege, relating that he and his troops slept clothed and booted, and his horse was always saddled in preparation for an attack. After considering and rejecting a number of plans for landings on the North Shore, a decision was made in late August by Wolfe and his brigadiers to land upriver of the city. If successful, such a landing would force Montcalm to fight, as a British force on the north shore of the St. Lawrence would cut his supply lines to Montreal. Initial suggestions for landing sites ranged as far as 32 kilometers up the St. Lawrence, which would have given the French troops 1 or 2 days to prepare for the attack. Following the failed British assault on Montmorency, Montcalm altered his deployment, sending Bougainville in a column of approximately 1,500 regular troops, 200 cavalry, and a group of new French militia, some 3,000 men in all, upriver to Cap Rouge to monitor the British ships upstream. He further strengthened his defences of the Beauport shore following the abandonment of the British camp at Montmorency, which he regarded as preparations for a descent on Beauport. In spite of warnings from local commanders, he did not view an upstream landing as a serious possibility. The British, meanwhile, prepared for their risky deployment upstream. Troops had already been aboard landing ships and drifting up and down the river for several days when Wolfe, on the 12th of September, made a final decision on the British landing site, selecting Llanzo-Fowlin. Llanzo-Fowlin is a cove situated southwest of the city, 3 kilometers upstream from Cap Diamant. It lies at the bottom of a 53-meter-high cliff leading to the plateau above, and was protected by a battery of guns. It is not known why Wolfe selected Fowlin, as the original landing site was to be further up the river, in a position where the British would be able to develop a foothold and strike at Bougainville's force to draw Montcalm out of Quebec and onto the plains. Brigadier General George Townshend wrote that, by some intelligence the general had, he has changed his mind as to the place he intended to land. In his final letter, dated HMS Sutherland, 8:30 p.m., the 12th of September, Wolfe wrote, Wolfe's plan of attack depended on secrecy and surprise. His plan required that a small party of men should land by night on the north shore, climb the tall cliff, seize a small road, and overpower the garrison that protected it, allowing the bulk of his army to ascend the cliff by the small road and then deploy for battle on the plateau. Even if the first landing party succeeded in their mission and the army was able to follow, such a deployment would still leave his forces inside the French line of defense with no immediate retreat but the river. It is possible that Wolfe's decision to change the landing site was owing less to a desire for secrecy and more to his general disdain for his brigadiers. It is also possible that he was still suffering the effects of his illness and the opiates he used as painkillers. Anderson believes Wolfe ordered the attack believing the advanced guard would be repulsed, and anticipated dying gallantly with his men rather than returning home in disgrace. Landing Bougainville, tasked with the defense of the large area between Cap Diamant and Cap Rouge, was upstream with his troops at Cap Rouge on the night of the 12th of September, and missed seeing numerous British ships moving downstream. A camp of approximately 100 militia led by Captain Louis Dupont du Chambon de Vergor, who had unsuccessfully faced the British 4 years previously at Fort Bois-Saint-Jean, had been assigned to watch the narrow road at Llanzo-Fowlin which followed a streambank, the Coulée Saint-Denis. On the night of the 12th of September and morning of the 13th of September, however, the camp may have contained as few as 40 men, as others were off harvesting. Vaudreuil and others had expressed their concern at the possibility of Llanzo-Fowlin being vulnerable, but Montcalm dismissed them, saying 100 men would hold off the army until daylight, remarking, "It is not to be supposed that the enemies have wings so that they can in the same night cross the river, disembark, climb the obstructed acclivity, and scale the walls, for which last operation they would have to carry ladders." Sentries did detect boats moving along the river that morning, but they were expecting a French supply convoy to pass that night, a plan that had been changed without Vergor being notified. When the boats, loaded with the first wave of British troops, were challenged, a French-speaking officer, either a Captain Fraser or Captain Donald MacDonald of the 78th Fraser Highlanders, was able to answer the challenge in excellent French, allaying suspicion. The boats, however, had drifted slightly off course. Instead of landing at the base of the road, many soldiers found themselves at the base of a slope. A group of 24 volunteers led by Colonel William Howe with fixed bayonets were sent to clear the picket along the road, and climbed the slope, a maneuver that allowed them to come up behind Vergor's camp and capture it quickly. Wolfe followed an hour later when he could use an easy access road to climb to the plain. Thus, by the time the sun rose over the plains of Abraham, Wolfe's army had a solid foothold at the top of the cliffs.